Hey yo guys, Tyler here, and today we are talking about siding and part 2 of the ultimate guide to heroes. So, side decking, what is it? Why do we do it? How do you get good at it? Let's talk about it. First of all guys, before we dive into today's video, as always, let's keep those likes high. Let's aim for a cheeky little 30 likes. Like this is a good number, 30 likes. I know you guys can do it, and let's try and push even further beyond. Go plus ultra in my hero video. So let's dive right into siding and talk about our matchups. Okay, so let's establish one thing first. At this point in time, heroes are kind of built to be able to go up quite powerfully against combo decks, meaning cards like Nibiru or other hand traps such as Infinite Impermanence and board breakers like Super Polymerization allows the deck to go second very well in the decks that have the most high impact from those cards, combo decks. So immediately our deck is kind of prepared for combo off of the go. So let's take a look at some random matchups that the heroes actually in this meta have quite a good matchup against. So we've got things such as just random combo decks, right? Things like Dragon Link, which isn't quite there yet, especially if they hit Fragger Pain. Certain Thunder Dragon matchups because they decide to overcommit and over-combo. You do also have more conservative Thunder Dragon players that are a bit of a harder time, but for those Thunder Dragon players that like to overextend and not set up those negates, they walk straight into your Nibiru. You also have some decks such as Orchist, which because they set up multiple dark monsters, not only are they a combo deck that can be hit by Nibiru, but also they're a prime target for Super Polymerization, as are Thunder Dragons. And also Sky Strikers. Now that Widow Anchor's been hit to 1, the deck has a bit more of an issue controlling the pace, so what we can do is take advantage of that slow nature and OTK them there and then. Also, if they make you go first, set up Darklaw. Their spells can't go and accrue advantage if they don't go to the graveyard. So in theory, lots of hero decks have lots of good things going against striker decks. And lastly, one of our good matchups here is Salamangreats. Again, we can abuse Super Poly of Salamangreats. Darklaw absolutely murders Salamangreats. So we've got quite a lot of good matchups, but let's talk about our bad matchups. Okay, so for some of our bad matchups, there's the following. Other rogue decks. Other rogue decks can be a bit of a problem in the sense that you may not necessarily know their game plan, and you may not know how to combat a lot of the cards if you haven't seen them before, especially decks that don't see much to any meta representation. Of course, they may share some aspects with the meta decks, such as Attribute. If they're all dark, they are prime Super Poly targets. Could be that they auto-lose to Nibiru. So some of them you absolutely will have a good matchup against, but by and large if it's a deck that you don't know much about, it's a harder matchup than a deck you do know about. Also, any floodgate heavy decks such as Altergeist, Guru, True Draco, those can provide problems with the deck because some floodgates just stop this deck in its tracks, and in which case you just kind of have to scoop and go to game 2 and be more prepared with your side deck. And lastly, Pendulum's a real big problem for this deck because sometimes they just set up too many negates for you to possibly play through. With the hit to Aggro Pain, Pendulum is actually slightly weaker than before. It does have to run more bricks, so it has a slightly lower power ceiling overall, but the deck can still pump out anywhere between 4 to 6, sometimes even 7 with the best hand of interruptions. So what do we do there? Well, it's kind of difficult. They do sometimes get outplayed by Nibiru if you hit them in the right spot and they don't have Jackal nice and early, and they can die to Super Poly if they only set up a couple of interruptions and you've got Super Poly in hand, because a lot of them are dark. But sometimes Pendulum just set up too much to play through, and that makes it a really bad matchup for the deck. So let's take a look at the side deck and what we can do to improve these matchups. Okay, so the first and possibly one of the most important things we need to understand about our side deck is a side deck is not a shoe that fits every foot. Your side deck must reflect your meta. If you're playing at locals and that locals has a lot of Orchist, then your side deck has to reflect that. If you're playing against a lot of back row decks, your side deck has to reflect that. If you're going to a regional where you know there's going to be a lot of control, because maybe there's a lot of control players in your area, there's going to be a lot of combo, then again your side deck kind of has to reflect that. But if you're going into an event where you've not got a lot of clues what's going on, let's talk about some really good generic side deck options that you can take to an event to increase your chances against lots of different types of decks. So let's dive right in. Alright, so first of all we are going to talk about our bad matchups. Later on we'll talk about how to side more effectively against some of your better matchups, that way you tip the scales in your favour even more. But for our bad matchups, let's talk about those damn pesky back row decks. So back row decks are a real pain because again there's floodgates, they set a lot of traps that have a lot of interaction on your turn, and they can potentially try and lock you out of the game altogether with their back row. But that's the important part, it's with their back row. So is there cards that we can use against their back row to really cripple them? Well, absolutely. Right now there's kind of what I consider the holy trinity of Cosmic Cyclone, which applies to a lot of back row decks, Twin Twister, which is absolutely probably the most generic back row removal ever, that's quite good, and Hey Trunade, which is a bit of an oddball. So let's go through them. Cosmic Cyclone. For the cost of 1000 life points, you can banish one spell or trap card on the field. Pretty basic, pretty simple, pretty easy to do. Why do we play this? Well, for decks like our Orcust matchup, it's very hard to destroy their back row. It's very difficult because they have Dingrisu on the field, which protects their back row, so you have to circumvent that, you have to banish it, okay? You have to non-destructively remove that card from the field. Again, Cosmic Cyclone also applies to other decks. Again, any back row deck that you have trouble removing all of the back row, Cosmic Cyclone's a good option. It's a nice 1-for-1. Again, that cost of 1000 life points isn't really a detriment up until you're maybe coming to time. In which case, if you're worried about the life point cost, Twin Twisters is a really good bet. Again, it's a 2-for-2. You use one card, discard a card, and pop two of their back row. But again, this doesn't apply to every deck, because there's decks such as Orcust which protect, there's decks such as True Draco which kind of want their back row to be popped sometimes. If you're not playing carefully and you're blindly popping True Draco back row, they've got their trap cards which will pop a monster on your side of the field, so you could potentially be losing out an advantage if you've got a board set up and you're blindly popping True Draco back row without thinking about it. Again, which is why sometimes Cosmic Cyclone is a good option instead of Twin Twister. And lastly, Hey Trunade. Hey Trunade is a card that bounces all of these set cards back to their hand. Why is that good? So first of all, for decks against like Sky Striker, for your back row decks in general, it either forces them to negate it, which is one less interruption for you to play through, or it removes some of the problematic cards. Sometimes it also forces them to activate certain cards because they would rather have those cards in the graveyard, meaning that if they're quick play spells, especially against like Sky Striker, they want to multi-roll those cards later on, so they don't want them back in their hand, they want them on the field. So by doing that, that allows you to force them to activate it so that it's less of a problem when you want to make your plays. But that's our kind of holy trinity of spells that destroy, remove, get rid of back row. There's another card that I really want to talk about because it's really good. Let's dive in. So one of my favourite cards against trap heavy decks, especially things like Draco, Altergeist, Guru, is Red Reboot. Okay, just in case any of you don't know what Red Reboot does, for the cost of half of your life points you can play this counter trap from your hand, which means only other counter traps can respond to it. So you can play it from your hand, in which case it negates the effect or activation, we'll look at it there, of a trap card, and then your opponent cannot activate trap cards for the rest of the turn. There is the downside where they get to set a trap card in their spell and trap zone, but are they really going to get to use it? Because you're going to OTK them that turn. Red Reboot is an absolute blowout against these decks. What you sometimes have to worry about is they may have Solemn set, in which case you need to be careful and bait out that back row. Don't blindly Red Reboot because it can in fact get you into some trouble. So be careful with it. If you think they don't really have anything set, go for it. You're staring down 5 back row. Odds are one of them is probably going to be a Solemn, so you want to play around that. Then sucker punch them with the Red Reboot. Let's take a look at certain cards that we can side in that make our current build more high impact. First of all, I want to take a look at another super poly target. It is indeed for Salamangreats and for Marincits, just in case they ever get popular. Essentially, what you do is you add this card to your deck. It's Diplex or Chimera, and all it requires is 2 Cyberse monsters. The benefit here is it's very generic and it hits Marincits if they get good, and Salamangreat, which is already an established threat. So the biggest benefit against Salamangreat is that they can't super poly it away for things like Violet Chimera, because what some people used to do is they'd super poly for Violet Chimera, and then the Salamangreat player would super poly for Violet Chimera. It's happened to me once before, wasn't fun, quite embarrassing. So this is why we use Diplex or Chimera, because it's harder for them to out based on the fact that it's not a Salamangreat card. Now there are an absolute myriad of cards that we can use going first to skew the matchups in our favour. Okay, let's take a look at why going first is a little bit more difficult for heroes. So basically, we are very good at spamming the board and setting up advantage, but that kind of dies to Nibiru, right? So first of all, there's the option where your opponent could Nibiru you. Second of all, There is also the difficulty in putting up lots of interruption. Dystopia is a very consistent one, and having a Dryden on your opponent's turn isn't too bad, because some decks actually do die to a well-timed pop. Surely it though, right? Plasma? Yeah, you can do Plasma, but again, that requires you to die to Nibiru. So let's talk about some cards that we can use to play a little bit slower, control the game a little bit more, and just chill out and really put our opponent in some awkward positions. Okay, so one of the first cards that we can use to absolutely blow out our opponents, especially our back row heavy opponents, is Eradicate Epidemic Virus. For the cost of tributing a dark monster with 2500 more attack points, you really hit their back row really hard, you hit their back row, you hit their hand, and it really messes up your opponents who rely on their back row. What it does is it puts you in a really comfortable position to chill out, puts us in a very comfortable position to give it a turn or two, really accrue some advantage and end them. Also, you get to see their hand, which is pretty nutty. Seeing your opponent's hand and having that information informs you of how you should be playing, because if you see they've got a bad hand, then you just go ahead and end them. If you see they've got a good hand, then maybe you want to be a bit more precautious about how you play, make sure to bait out those negates, and then try and play with your opponent for advantage. Yeah, but that's Eradicate Epidemic Virus, and for those back row heavy decks that we're not very fond of, it absolutely is. Another absolute blowout card for heroes to run in the side deck is Different Dimension Ground. Let's take a look at it. There it is there. So this turn, any monster that would go to the graveyard is banished instead. Let me tell you how many decks that absolutely ruins. Lots of them, right? It really messes with Pendulum. If you go first, it really messes with Salamangreats, it really messes with Orcust. Setting up a Macrocosmos for a turn, they run out of resources very quickly, or it forces them to not commit very many resources and set up a suboptimal board. This is also a backup plan just in case we can't get to our Darklaw. Darklaw is better in the sense that it has a body and that it is a one-sided, so your cards, if they go to the graveyard, don't get banished, but setting this up against a lot of rogue options as well, against a lot of meta options, is an absolute blowout, and it will end your opponent's turn with either a suboptimal board or it'll end it with no resources for them to commit to. Okay, next up we have Artifact Sanctum and Artifact Scythe. Artifact Sanctum will summon Artifact Scythe from your deck, and Artifact Scythe, when it's summoned, will activate its trigger effect to shut your opponent out from the extra deck for the turn. Pluses here is that it provides a body on board. It also shuts your opponent out from the extra deck if they don't have an out to it. If they don't have that Ash Blossom, if they don't have that infinite impermanence, then they are screwed. They lose, right? So being able to shut your opponent out of the extra deck again just forces them to commit to a suboptimal board so that you can OTK them next turn. It's a little bit bricky since it's quite a large engine, but if you manage to resolve it, you win that game. So that's it. Scythe and Sanctum are a nice little package, and they're not too difficult to explain, which makes my life so much easier. But speaking of artifacts, let me tell you about Artifact Lancia. You tribute it from your hand or field during your opponent's turn to stop them from banishing for the turn. Again, this hits some of our really difficult matchups such as Thunder Dragons if they don't want to commit to lots of boards. It really hits Orcust as well. Really, again, you're going second, it forces them to just commit to suboptimal plays in which you OTK them next turn if they don't have the Called by the Grave. There's a lot of decks that want to use their graveyard and banish stuff from their graveyard so that you just play your Lancia. It is the best generic anti-banish card right now. It is a must in your side deck. This is one of the only cards I say right now in this format is 150,000% a must. And there's a commons, so it's pretty affordable, and I'm pretty sure it got reprinted in Heroes Revenge, but it's a secret, so nah, that might be a little bit more pricey, but it is really shiny and gorgeous. And lastly, for these traps, they're traps, so a real big benefit is Trap Trick. Just in case you don't know what Trap Trick does, essentially it tutors out any trap or any normal trap in your deck. It doesn't do continuous, it doesn't do counter, but any normal trap, which we've just went over a lot of them. Eradicate Epidemic, Sanctum, Different Dimension Ground, all of them are regular traps, and they can be tutored out with Trap Trick. And again, it just makes that go in first play way more consistent. Depending on the deck that you want to go up against, then what it does is it just allows you more safety, right? It's very easy for this deck with very little resources to set up a Dread Decimator like Dystopia, and then having that back row to help you out here, and then increase your chances of winning, immediately puts you in a way better position. So being able to essentially play 5 copies of any trap card that you want, because 2 Trap Trick's a good number, any 5 trap cards that you want in there is amazing, and it just improves our consistency. But that's our general side deck tips, so let's take a look at what a side deck could look like for heroes going into an event like a locals or a regional or even a YCS. Okay, so I've put together this side deck here just as a general guide. Again, this isn't the side deck, this is just one that I've quickly put together to help kind of showcase what we would use and why. As we said earlier, first of all, the free Artifact Lancia is a must. Then we've also got our Solemn Judgments in, because again it's pretty much free. It's free disruption, it doesn't matter your life points, as long as you're not close to time, it's absolutely free disruption on your opponent's turn, and it's totally okay to draw into multiples, because it's not once per turn. Next we have Diplex or Chimera and another Super Poly. Sometimes you main 2 Super Poly, sometimes you main 3, that changes from person to person. Next we do have our free Different Dimension Ground and our 2 Trap Trick. Again, that Different Dimension Ground could be something like Eradicate Epidemic Virus, it could be a lot of things, right? But again, setting up this package of 5 trap cards to essentially guarantee that we stop our opponent in some way, shape or form and make their life very difficult to use their graveyard, which, to be honest, there's a lot of graveyard based decks these days that need their cards to go to the graveyard, so it's kind of a blowout option. And then lastly, we've got 2 Cosmic Cyclone. One thing I forgot to mention again is Stratos' effect to essentially blow up back row. It's very easy to get 2 other hero monsters on board and then use Stratos to blow up their back row. So what that does is it means that we've got Spell and Trap Destruction on tap, but alternative methods of getting rid of them, we don't really, right? So it's good to have that banishing option, or again you can use Hatred as an option. But that's the kind of generic side deck I've put together. But guys, let's take it to the outro. So guys, that is part 2 of the ultimate guide to heroes. What did you think? What did you think about the side deck options? What did you think about some of the text that are shown in the video? Do you have spicy text yourself? Do you have some secrets that you want hero players to know about? Do you have anything that you'd like to say about the choices I've given? Do you think they're good? Do you think that they need some work? I'm totally open to some critique and some honest feedback, and I would love to see you guys chatting down in the comments. But as always guys, you have been amazing. I have been Tally. I'll catch you all later. Bye.